Visiting Scholars Forum. So very excited about this program. For those of you this is the first time you're tuning in, I'm sure there's hundreds of Jinspire men and women out there tuning in, but we have a really great follow-up program. Every month we have a high-level, interesting speaker in a different one of our Jinspire branches, and it's really fulfilling a great curriculum, really a required curriculum by the JWRP. So every month we help everybody, all of you, all the Jinspire branches fulfill that curriculum. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Simcha Barnett. I'm the director of the Jinspire branches. Many of you don't know that. You have a director, even though you don't know it. They let one man into this, little exclusive club. Anyway, we're here in Manhattan, and we really would first like to thank the Schwabels for hosting us and loving it all. Thank you very, very much. And for Cheryl and Elisa, the wonderful city leaders who are making this happen. We have great guests from Queens. So I want to give a shout out to Queens. Because we do encourage any of you from the branches to make the trek to our neighboring Jinspire branches. It really means a lot to everybody. So tonight's topic is a little different than we've had the last few times. We're going to do it. We're going to do something to do with Israel activism. And I was just thinking, as a good friend of mine, Rabbi Mathias, if I go back with a long way, he's going to be presenting tonight. But I was just thinking, in the last 10, 15 years, even the way the media has changed in presentation over my lifetime, my recent lifetime. And I just remember, years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when there would be a terrorist incident, and God forbid, and unfortunately, when Jews were murdered, there was always a little bit of a respite in the media bashing. There was usually some type of, one day, a week, there was some kind of like, there's so much sympathy, how could you bash Israel continually when there's killings and murders going on? But what I've noticed recently in the last few years, that doesn't stop anybody anymore. You're in Gaza, and instead of focusing on the thousands of missiles that they're raining down to murder Jews, all the media talks about is the response of the Israelis. Even now, you see this unprovoked wave of terror attacks. What does the media focus on? The media focuses on the response. So we don't even have, it's harder and harder, and Rabbi Mathias will address it, but it seems like it's harder and harder to turn the tide, to turn the tables today than it's ever been. It's very important, particularly in this kind of situation. We have Rabbi Mathias here. We go back a long way to Aish Torah. We were students together, and Rabbi Mathias, really actually as a student said, we've got to do something on the college campuses. He saw the kids that were coming to Aish, and they were just, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to fight the Arab propaganda. So he, with the help of the Israeli government, started what's called the Hasbara Fellowships. It was to give our students all over America and North America and Toronto and other places in Canada the tools to fight back, the tools to advocate for Israel on campus. And he's grown this to campuses all over the country, all over America, all over Canada, and he's doing more and more and more. And it's really, Hasbara is the foremost college campus advocacy organization in the country, and it's all because of Rabbi Mathias. So he's going to share words with us how we can help our children, and also what we can do not on the campuses but back here in America. Rabbi Mathias.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Rabbi Burnett, for inviting me, and to the Schwabels for hosting. Very much appreciate your hospitality and having me. The JWRP program, obviously, who here was on the program? Okay. So, the main thing I do with Hasbara Fellowship Digital Advocacy is that we bring college students to Israel. And we train them in Israel how to do Israel advocacy. And the question that I often get, part of my job, it's my organization, the executive director, I have to go around fundraising and asking, people to sponsor students to go on the trip. And the question I often get is, well, why do you do it in Israel? The talking points, how to answer the difficult questions, training the students how to do advocacy. You could do that in New York. You could do it in LA. You could do it in Washington, D.C. And by the way, a lot of organizations do that. Why do you have to spend all the money to bring them to Israel? So anyone who's been on JWRP, I don't have to answer that question. I think you know the answer. My wife was on a JWRP mission, so we know JWRP very well. And I think you get the point that it's, yes, the content that you learn, the relationships that you make, it's the program, but the program wouldn't be the program if it's not in Israel. There's something unique, there's something special about the land of Israel, about the people of Israel, that makes it what it makes the program what it is and what's so special. When I think of Israel, first of all, I think of the people, right? I don't know if people noticed when you're there, you know, Israelis act a little different than Americans. It's a little bit of a different breed, right? Anybody here like stand in line for a bus in Israel, right? You have to like wear padding, you know, because you got like the elbows coming into your ribs. You know, people, there's no such thing as standing in line in Israel. There's a total different level of formality amongst Israelis, right? I don't know if anyone here is familiar, if like ever gone to like a business meeting in Israel. You know, so you imagine you go to like a big, you know, business meeting in America and you wear your suit or whatever. In Israel, you walk into a business meeting, they're wearing a t-shirt and jeans, right? So what's going on? Why is there this real lack of formality in Israel? And there's this really, like, people are really just kidding. You know, you get on a bus in Israel with your kid and you're gonna have 6 moms coming over and telling you, you know, you don't have his jacket on right, his boots on right. You know, there's this total lack of formality. So I think it's the following. So I have 5 kids. And at 7:30 in the morning in my house, I have 5 kids, they're all under the age of 12. At 7:30 in the morning in my house, it's a little chaotic, right? So you can imagine the picture in my house, and maybe this is something you could see in your house. You know, I have my 8-year-old son, he comes downstairs at 7:30 in the morning, he opens the refrigerator to get some breakfast, even though he eats the same thing for breakfast every day. I don't know, he thinks miraculously, you know, like some pancakes are gonna appear or something this morning. And he's standing there just staring at the refrigerator, figuring out what he's gonna have for breakfast. 30 seconds later, his 11-year-old brother walks downstairs, right? Now, let me ask you the question. Do you think his 11-year-old brother comes and patiently stands in line behind his 8-year-old brother to get breakfast? What does he do? Get out of the way, right? I'm hungry, right? It becomes a free-for-all. Then after 10 seconds, they forget they wanted breakfast and they're wrestling on the ground. That's what boys do. But there's total, like, no sense of order, or I wait my turn. No, I'm not saying, maybe it sounds like I'm a bad parent, you know, my kids don't know. But if you take my kids and if you go, you know, we go to the school parent-teacher conferences and they say my kids are, you know, they're unbelievably polite and Barnett knows my kids are very well behaved in public and they, you know, they're great kids, and all of a sudden you bring them in the house and they act like a bunch of animals, right? What's going on? So I think what's the answer? The answer is when you're at home, you act differently. When you're in your own house, you act with a familiarity. It's not a formal place. Everything is very close and personal. And so my theory is, why do Israelis act this way? Why in Israel there's no such thing as a line? There's no such thing as formalities, because Israelis look at the entire country as it's their home. It is their home, right? When they're standing in line for a bus, it's the same thing as when they're standing in line in their own kitchen, right? Trying to get breakfast instead of their sibling. There's no such thing as this formality. And so to me, you know, I always remember my bubby when I was young, and she used to talk about when she went to Israel for the first time after the 6-day war and how she got off the plane. And the first thing they said to her was, "Welcome home." And that hit her so much. It touched her so much. She would always say that to me over and over again, and that always stayed with me. So that's Israel. And really, as Rabbi Barnett said, unfortunately, for most people in the world, they don't look at Israel that way. How do people in the world know about Israel? How does anybody know about anything that's going on in the world? Through the media, right? The media. And the media has a specific lens, right? Anybody open up the New York Times lately or look on CNN or wherever you get your news and hear the story about how yesterday 8 million Israelis woke up, they had breakfast, they went to work, they went to school, they came home, they watched their favorite TV show. Anybody see that story in the newspaper? Right. Of course not. Because what's the picture the media shows is what sells. That's what the media is about, right? Is what sells. So what sells? Violence, conflict, right? And so unfortunately, when people look at the lens of what Israel is, or see Israel through this lens, that often is not a very welcoming place. There was a study that was done where they asked people to describe a country. They gave them different countries to describe based on describing a house that would be in that country, right? So they said to them, describe Italy. What would a house, in a typical house, if you could paint a house, what would it look like in Italy? So what would you say? What would a house in Italy look like?
A kitchen.
A big kitchen, right? Lots of food and, you know, Italian food and everyone's eating, right? And what else? Nice garden, okay. Yeah, beautiful furnishings, wine, people are laughing, people are having, this is exactly how people describe a house in Italy. When they ask people to describe a house in Israel, how do you think they describe it? Guns, you're absolutely right. They describe it as a bunker, as a gray concrete bunker with barbed wire, right? This is how people look at Israel because this is how the media depicts it. When they think of a typical Israeli, anybody here Israeli? Okay, good, so I can say whatever I want. We all know Israelis, right? So we know who Israelis are, but if you go out on the street, probably New York City is not a good popular, but I don't know, go out on the streets in Boise, Idaho, right? And ask people, who is an Israeli? What would we get? What would be the response? You can tell you got something brewing there.
Loud and obnoxious.
Loud and obnoxious, okay. Soldiers. What else?
Pushy.
Pushy. And there's one other big one. There's a, very good, exactly. Religious and military, right? I usually, sometimes I do a presentation, I have a PowerPoint, so now I show a picture of a guy standing up on a hilltop, probably just stole the land from some Arab, just pushed him off the hill, right? He's got a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other. That's the Israelis that people think of, but really Israelis are the most diverse people in the world, literally. I'm not using hyperbole, right? Israelis come from every corner of the globe, every continent. Since 1948, now it's been almost 70 years, right? Israel's population has multiplied 10 times, right? The United States of America, the land of immigration, right? You know how the population has about doubled during that time. 10 times Israel has increased its population, and coming from everywhere, Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from North America, South America, etc. Right? Israel's a tremendously diverse place, and yet there's this very stereotypical Israeli that people have as a misconception. So as Rabbi Burnett mentioned, I started an organization called House of Breath Fellowships, and I'll tell you a quick story how we started it because I think I think it's an interesting story, and I get to speak, so you get to listen to me. So I was studying in Israel. I graduated university. I went to Northwestern University in Chicago, and I'm from the Midwest and from Chicago. My brother was at the University of Wisconsin at the time, and it was the year 2000, right? Now, I can appreciate speaking to this group because I now speak mainly to college students. And when I say the year 2000, they have to go look it up in a history book, right? If they don't know 2000, I don't know what happened in 2000, right? It's pretty wild. I mentioned 9/11. 9/11. I heard of that, I think, once, right? It's pretty wild. But that's who we're dealing with, and I'll get into that in a little bit when we talk about Israel and how people understand Israel, because there is a generation gap. So in 2000, if people remember, there was what was called the Intifada, right? The Intifada where Ariel Sharon, people have heard of Ariel Sharon, he was the Prime Minister of Israel. At that time, he was the Foreign Minister of Israel. He went up onto the Temple Mount, we call the Har HaBayit, right behind the Western Wall, and because that is considered to be the holiest place in Judaism. By the way, the Western Wall is not the holiest place in Judaism. It's what's behind the Western Wall. The Western Wall was a retaining wall of what stood behind the wall, which was the temple. It's also, if you haven't noticed, a holy place to some other religions, and so it's a little bit of a place sometimes of conflict. And Ariel Sharon decided to go up there, and they decided, the other side, we know now it was planned, it wasn't spontaneous, but that sparked the Intifada. Now, when you were in JWRP, you went to the Aish building, which overlooks the Western Wall. So I studied at Aish for a number of years in the yeshiva there. And so literally when Ariel Sharon went up there, it was literally like a war broke out. It was like watching CNN, but it was out the window of our building. There were helicopters and soldiers being taken out on stretchers and gunshots. It was wild, right? And a couple of days later, and then the Intifada started, and it was a very difficult time to be in Israel. Terrorism and things happening. And at that time, the head of Aish Torah, his name was Rabbi Noach Weinberg, he started Aish Torah, and he got up in front of the entire yeshiva where I was studying, and he said the following. He said, Israel is at war, right? And then he looked at us and he said, what are you guys doing about it? So we all looked at each other. What do you mean? We're a bunch of yeshiva buckers. What do you mean? What are we doing about it? Right? What are we supposed to do about it? He said, every day you should be spending time thinking about how you can help Israel, how you can help the Jewish people. If you come up with an idea, so then go do it, right? If you don't have an idea, okay, so sit and learn. You're in yeshiva. But you're obligated to be thinking every day, what are the problems that Jewish people are facing? This was a big one right in front of our eyes. And you need to think about what you can do about it. Now, like I mentioned at the time, my brother was at the University of Wisconsin, and he started telling me about simultaneously when this violence was happening in Israel, what was going on his campus. And what was happening in his campus was the anti-Israel students all of a sudden spontaneously started organizing where they would stand in the middle of campus and they would wear army fatigues with the letters IDF for the Israeli Defense Forces on it. And they would stand in the middle of campus, and as people passed by, they would say, show us your ID. Because, in Israel, if you're not Jewish, you're not allowed to move freely. And then the next day, they put mock, chalkings on the ground of dead Palestinian babies that the Israelis were killing. And there were things in the campus newspaper. And it wasn't just Wisconsin. It started happening on campuses across the country, in Berkeley in California, and at Columbia in New York, and in other places in Canada. And at that point, we decided we needed to do something, and we started Hasbara Fellowships. But to me, it's a powerful story because at that point, I was studying in yeshiva. I said, what do you mean, who, me? And now since that time, we've trained over 3,000 college students to go onto their campuses and stand up for Israel and be proud of Israel and be able to tell a different story. Now, what's really interesting with all of this anti-Israel propaganda going on campuses, you would think that young people on campus are becoming much more supportive of Israel's enemies, right? They see Israel's, mock apartheid walls is a big thing that we see on campus. The students, again, these anti-Israel students come up and they take big wooden walls they are plywood walls, and they set it up in the middle of campus, and they paint it and spray paint it with, the atrocities that Israel is committing, Israel's a racist country and all of these things. Another big thing that we've been seeing over the last few years that I'm sure people have heard about is BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, where students will go into the student government at a university and they'll say, you know what, our university invests funds in companies that are helping the Israeli war machine target innocent Palestinian civilians. And so we want to pull we don't want our tuition dollars to go towards investing in companies like IBM and Caterpillar and GE, et cetera, who are working with the apartheid regime of Israel. They go into the student government and they throw all these lies and these lies and these lies, and they try in certain campuses, even though you'd wonder who cares what a student government in the middle of wherever says, but they pass resolutions saying, we, the students of the University of California at Berkeley, right, say that we should divest all of our funds from the state of Israel, right? And we've seen this on many campuses across the country. Now, with all this propaganda, you would think that support for the poor Palestinians, this would be something that would rise, and it's not the case. There's a lot of statistics and studies and polling that has been done, and what's been shown is that, if you ask your average American, right? Maybe people have seen these polls. If you ask your average American, do you support Israel or do you support the Palestinians? By the way, it's not a great question because you can ask the question different ways, you get different numbers, but let's just say you ask that question. What percentage of Americans say they support Israel? Anyone know? Take a guess. We won't.
30%.
30%. Any other guesses?
10.
10? Wow, you guys are gonna be surprised.
Yeah, I think like 6.
Yeah, it's about 65 to 70% of Americans say they support Israel. And anyone know what percentage of Americans say they support the Palestinians? And again, this when they're given this question, do you support Israel or the Palestinians? There's different ways. No, this is Americans across the board. 65 to 70% say they support Israel. What percentage? Any math experts here? So no, actually, you'd think that, but it's actually much smaller. It's about 5 to 7% of Americans say they support the Palestinians. Where's everybody else? Yeah, they don't care. They're all crazy, right? They've been killing each other for thousands of years, or I don't know, or I don't want to choose sides, whatever it is.
So what's the explanation?
Of why people are more pro-Israel?
Why so many support Israel in spite of...
So first of all, if you do this polling in Western Europe, it's exactly the opposite. There's something about the American, I think for Americans, there's a few things. One is, yeah, they look at Israelis as a shared values, as a place that has many commonalities with America. From the very beginning of these countries, America and Israel are two countries that were built by immigrants that were coming back, right? Or at least with Israel going back, with Americans going to somewhere new, but a place of refuge, let's say, that they could go to. They're based on religious ideals. They're based on the modern concepts of democracy and freedom and minority rights and human rights. And they're very similar ideas. Security as well, for sure. You know that the original, and I don't get off too much on a tangent here, but the original founding fathers of this country, there was actually a discussion about making the official language of America Hebrew. That was the discussion. Interestingly enough, when there was the founding of Israel, there was a discussion of making the official language of Israel German. Yeah, I'm not just saying it was one or two people. These were real discussions that went on, right? And I don't know, you can make your own conclusion what that's about. But there's a deep support of Americans, and you see it. It's you know, unfortunately, it's eroding in certain ways, and it's very dangerous. But there's really a bipartisan support in this country. No matter, you know, I mean, there are very few things that Republicans and Democrats agree about anymore. But they're all fighting to show how pro-Israel they are, right? There's something that's still there as a core.
Isn't that also because the Christians want Israelis to defend the Christian faith and they're afraid of the Muslims?
So there's definitely a tremendous Christian support in this country. You have evangelical Christians. There's somewhere between 60 to 80 million evangelical Christians in this country that are very supportive of Israel. Fortunately, it's not necessarily the case with all Christian strands today. When you go to the more mainline Protestants, we're already starting to see BDS, divestment, you know, anti-Israel things going. And even amongst the evangelicals, we're starting to see chipping away, especially amongst younger generation, that the support is not as strong as it maybe was. So there's no doubt. And the evangelicals, which we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years, have become a political power in this country. Even before the sort of the rise of the evangelicals in this country, there was tremendous support. You know, if you go back to the 70s, that support was still there. I think at the core, it comes from those sort of shared values, and some of them are religious values. The point I wanted to get to, and we can go on many tangents, and that's fine. I want to open this up as much as possible, is that when they ask the same question to 18 to 26-year-olds, right, which is sort of my target audience that I'm trying to reach. Again, these are Americans across the board. And they ask them, do you support Israel or do you support the Palestinians? Most people think that support for the Palestinians would go way up because all the propaganda that's happening on campuses, whatever. And they find that it goes up very little. It does go up somewhere, somewhat. Support for Palestinians is somewhere around 10%, right? So it's a doubling, it's more, it's higher, but you're still not talking about a very high percentage of the population. The problem that we're facing is that the percentage that they say they support Israel is more around 40 to 45%. So where are all those people going? They're in the middle. More and more people are coming to the middle and saying, wait a minute, I don't necessarily support, you know, the Palestinians or the Arabs, whatever it might be. I mean, to be politically correct here, I don't think there's anything Israel has to say about, you know, those people. Your average American looks at them and says, that's not who I identify with. You know, terrorism is in the world, things that are happening. But your average young American kid who's 18 to 26 is saying, but wait a minute, this is not an election. I don't have to choose one or the other. Just because I don't identify with these people doesn't mean that I have to support these people. And so the real question that comes up is that they're asking themselves is, why should I support Israel? Why is Israel a place that I should lend my support to, my political support, my financial, whatever it might be? And so this is the challenge that we face when it comes to campus, when it comes to Israel advocacy, is really, first of all, you know, we train our students, you know, that 5 to 10% on the other side. Is there any reason to really engage and argue with them? Yeah? Why?
Because if they have passion, then they're going to convince other people, and that 5% ends up growing, and they're settling for long-term gain.
So you're saying to engage those people in order to influence the people who haven't made up their mind yet?
Well, they're talking to those people also.
It's true, but you're not going to change those people's minds. They're going to talk to them anyway. Listen, there's always exceptions. But there's a core group of people just as there's a core group of people who support Israel. And you know what? I'm one of that core. You stick me in the middle of, an apartheid, anti-Israel, demonstration, and you put me in an anti-Israel conference for 2 weeks, I'm still going to walk out saying I support Israel, right? That's just that's who I am. These people also, you're not going to change their minds, right? So maybe it was sort of what you're saying. I said it for you, so I don't know if you agree with it, but we say, yes, only engage those people if there are other people in the middle. That's really who we're trying to reach if we're also influencing those people, right? If you're really trying to get those people in the middle to understand what Israel's really about. Now, what is Israel really about? So a lot of the time we spend time trying to say what Israel is not, right? Israel is not doing this. Israel is not doing that. I remember a number of years ago, it was soon after 2001 that I was talking about, I think it was maybe 2002 already or 2003, where there was a terrible terrorist attack on Passover in Netanya. People remember this. And literally a terrorist went into a Seder in a hotel in Netanya and blew himself up and killed many people. It was really horrible. And unfortunately, it was after a spate of terror attacks. And Israel decided enough was enough. And on Passover decided to call up the reserve units, and they decided to go into cities like Jenin, which were Palestinian cities, to hunt after the terrorists that were there. And the first thing they did after they went into the city is they closed the city off. No media was allowed in, right, because it was dangerous. There was literally going to be a house-to-house battle going on. Now, the fact that they closed off the media, they did it for people's safety, but of course, and the people who hate Israel, they used it against Israel. So what did they say? Immediately, you saw on CNN, Palestinian spokespeople saying, there's a massacre happening in Jenin. Literally, a famous Palestinian spokesperson, I have the clip of it. His name is Saeb Erekat. He's very famous. He goes around speaking for them. On CNN, he said thousands of Palestinians have been killed by the Israelis. There's a massacre going on in Jenin. Now, the truth is, after the fact, when all the facts were found out, there were 72 Palestinians killed in Jenin, of which I think 58 were actual terrorists that were fighting against the Israelis, right? So, sorry 14 civilians were killed. It's a terrible thing. No one supports innocent people being hurt or killed. It's a terrible thing. But to say that's a massacre when you're going to search after terrorists, and that's what happened. But on CNN, I remember when this was happening, watching CNN, and here you had Saeb Erekat saying a massacre in Jenin, thousands of Palestinians being killed. And CNN, being the very objective news source it is, had an Israeli spokesperson on to give the other side. And this Israeli spokesperson was a spokesperson for the army. His English was great, very good looking, got up there. And what did he go on to say? There's no massacre happening in Jenin. It's not true that the Israelis are killing innocent people. And I remember watching it and just saying, this is not good for the good guys. Because, okay, it's true, he has the facts on his side. But just think, if you're in that middle group of people who don't really know what's going on, you're not that invested, you don't care. Anybody know who was the good guys, the Hutus or the Tutsis? Anyone can give me the 50-year explanation of the background of what happened in Rwanda? Millions of people died, right? We don't know who was the good. So you have to remember, just the way we look at that, most people look at what's going on in Israel, they don't know who's the good. So what did they see? They saw two people arguing about whether the Israelis had massacred the Palestinians. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Yeah, the guy who was saying they didn't had some good facts on his side. But at the end of the day, they're going to walk away with that question of, did the Israelis massacre the Palestinians? We have to change the discussion and talk about things that we want to talk about. To talk about things that show people, because when we are constantly just saying Israel's not, Israel's not, Israel's not, we're going to lose. And also because, again, our challenge is not to show people how bad the other side is, but to give people a reason to support Israel. We have to show people what Israel's about. So I think we all know Israel's an amazing place, right? First of all, when you look at Israel, just physically, when you look at Israel, right? Everyone looked at, a map of the globe. And literally, if you take a flat map, and you take Europe, Africa, Asia, right? Where is Israel? Smack right in the middle, right? Israel is literally right in the middle of the world, so to speak. In Judaism, we say that Jerusalem is the center of the world, right? Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, that from Zion, Torah, wisdom goes out, that Jerusalem's the center of the world, but literally, physically, it's right there. The whole world is focused on this place, right? And not only is it right in the center of the world, but it's a tiny, tiny little place. Anybody know at Israel's widest point how wide it is? How many miles? At its widest point. Take a guess.
90 miles.
Great guess. It's actually 85 miles. And it's which means that any time you're in Israel, you are never more than 40 miles away from a border with Egypt or Syria or Lebanon or whatever it might be. It's an interesting neighborhood, right? At its most narrow point, anyone know how wide Israel is?
9.
Very good. 9 miles wide. Right? There's people that jog 9 miles every day. I mean, I'm not one of those people, but let alone, right? And you start to, Israel is smaller than New Jersey, right? Israel is this tiny place, but yet, how amazing of a place it is. The world's oldest inhabited city, constantly inhabited city is in Israel. Anyone know what it is? No? Jericho. Very good. You're not allowed to answer. You got all the answers. Jericho. The world's oldest in use port city is in Israel. No? Good. Someone said Jaffa, right? Jaffa. The lowest point on earth is in Israel. The Dead Sea. Yeah. Does anyone know how deep the Dead Sea is? It's about 1,400 feet below sea level, right? Pretty amazing. I think the lowest place in North America is Death Valley, which is like 400 feet below sea level, right? And one of my favorite things about the Dead Sea is a few years ago, why do they call it the Dead Sea? Nothing can live there, right? Why can't anything live there? It's full of salt, right? So what's the other thing you can't do in the Dead Sea?
Drown.
Exactly, you can't sink, right? You see other people reading the newspaper. So one of my favorite thing, again, I know the picture a few years ago, Israel brought in sumo wrestlers from Japan to have them go in the Dead Sea to see if it was true, if you couldn't sink, right? You see these guys like flapping around in the Dead Sea, it's pretty funny. But if you think about it, this tiny, tiny little place and how unbelievably diverse it is, right? In a place that's smaller than the size of New Jersey, in one day you could be in a lot going scuba diving, and you can drive literally from the bottom place of the country to the top place of the country, which is about 350 miles, right? So you can decide how fast you can drive that, right? And you can go skiing, right? In the same place, right? And these are all just physical aspects of it, let alone, like I mentioned before, Jerusalem, the spiritual, basically capital of all the Western religions. And so when you just look at Israel and it's a physical place, it's so amazing. Let alone when you start to talk about the Jewish connection to the land, right? Israel is the connection to the Jewish people, the land of Israel, is something that you don't see really anywhere else in the world. I don't know how many years ago approximately Jews first came to the land of Israel. Any guesses? Be off by 1,000 years. What's 1,000 years here and there? Like any guesses? How many?
First?
Yeah, when did Jews first come to the land of Israel? About how many years ago?
3,000.
Yeah, so we say a little bit more. Jews say about 3,800 years. Again, what's 800 years between it's like I like American history. It's like you go to Boston and you can really learn about like ancient American history. It's like 300 years old. You walk through Jerusalem, you're like kicking rocks that are 300 years old, right? There's a different sense of time there. Jews have been there for a long time. A lot of people have the misconception. They think that Jews were there thousands of years ago. Okay, but you left and you came back in modern times. It's a big misconception. There's always been a presence of Jews in the land of Israel. Even when 99% of the Jews were kicked out, and that's an important terminology because Jews didn't choose to leave. We were kicked out. There were always some Jews that still lived there, right? Mainly, right, in the holy cities of Israel. A lot of you guys were just in Israel. What are the holy cities of Israel? There's 4 of them.
Jerusalem, Tzfat,
Hebron and Tiberias. Right. Okay. Very good.
We went to 3 of them.
Yeah. Which one did you go to?
Okay.
Okay. That is true. It's amazing. Next time you go, God willing, it should be very peaceful and calm, and you should go there because it's an amazing place. Jews always had a presence in those places, right? Again, I'm not going to bore you with the whole history lesson, but we've always had a presence there. And even when 99% of the Jews were kicked out, where did we want to go back to? Don't say Brooklyn. Florida, right? We always wanted to go back to the land of Israel. When Jews pray, what direction do we pray in? What if you're in China? Huh? West? Okay, so which direction do we really pray in? Towards Israel. If you're in Israel, you pray towards Jerusalem. If you're in Jerusalem, you pray towards Western Wall. If you're at the Western Wall, which way do you pray? It's a local call. So really, you're supposed to pray, like I mentioned before, the wall is just the retaining wall. It's really what was behind it. We don't know exactly, but we think somewhere where that golden dome is today is where the temple stood. That's the holiest place in Jerusalem. You pray sort of towards that direction. Jews have always been connected to that place. On Passover, we say L'shana haba be Yerushalayim, right next year in Jerusalem. When two Jews get married under the canopy, and everyone says Mazel Tov, right? What just happened? When do we say Mazel Tov during a Jewish marriage? Oh, but there's something in the ceremony where everyone says, congratulations, it's the highlight of the wedding. Break the glass, right? So why do we break the glass? They say it's the last time the man's going to put his foot down.
Is that it?
No, that's it. Yeah, it probably is true, but you won't find that in a Jewish source. Yeah, why?
Memory of the destruction of the temple.
Yeah, that we remember, even at this pinnacle of happiness, that something is missing. All of these things are part of who we are as a people for thousands of years, wanting to come back to the land of Israel. You know, it's absolutely amazing. You know, in the ancient world, when nations, an empire would take over another nation, you know what they would do to them? They would exile them, right? The 10 lost tribes. What happened to the 10 lost tribes? Why do we have 10 lost tribes? They just decided to leave. They were exiled, right? The Babylonians came, took over Israel, took the tribes and exiled them. That's what they would do, because you can't revolt against the power, against the empire when you're exiled, right? And what happens when you're exiled? You become assimilated. That's why we don't really know where the 10 tribes are anymore. They basically disappeared. I mean, a couple of them, we think, in Ethiopia and India, whatever, but basically they disappeared. You know, in the history of the ancient world, when nations would be conquered, they would be exiled, they would disappear. In the history of the ancient world, there was never a nation that was exiled that came back to their homeland. The Jewish people have done it twice. I mean, think about that. Talking about the connection the Jewish people have to this land. No nation ever returned to their homeland after being exiled. The Jewish people have done it twice, right? The second time being in the modern era when we've come back. And again, you think about this amazing place. It's not only beyond the laws of nature and beyond the laws of history that the Jewish people came back, which it is, because no nation's ever come back, and the Jewish people did it after 2,000 years, but it's a miracle that we survived, right? When Israel came back, you know, it wasn't like there was a big welcome sign saying, you know, hey, welcome Jews, welcome back to the land of Israel, right? The New York Times, the front page of the New York Times on May 15th, 1948, the day after Israel was created, front page, it's amazing. It says, Tel Aviv announces state of Israel, Egypt bombs Tel Aviv. That was the front page, right? Nice welcoming party, right? And it wasn't just Egypt, it was Syria and Lebanon and Jordan, all attacked Israel simultaneously. Israel not only, and they were outnumbered, outmanned, this tiny little country the size of New Jersey, surrounded by tens and tens of millions of people that wanted to destroy it. It didn't just go against the laws of nature that Israel came back, the Jews came back, but they survived. But in addition to that, is that they thrived. Right? You ever heard the idea, you know, making the desert bloom? Right? If you look at Israel today, and literally you see a country that, like I said, has not only survived, but has thrived, that has become, you know, the average GDP today in Israel is on par with Britain. Britain had a little bit of an advantage, you know, a few years of a head start, you know, in Israel. The average GDP, gross domestic product, average income basically the average income of a citizen. Right? It's the same as Britain. Now, there's more Israeli companies today listed on Wall Street, more than any other country in the world besides America and one other. You know which one it is?
China.
China. Yeah, very good. China. Right? They also have a little bit of an advantage over Israel, right? A few more people, right? You can go on and on and on. And you know what's amazing about Israel is not only that they've made the desert bloom and have become this thriving society, but from the beginning, when they came back, they said, you know, we don't want to become a thriving society just for ourselves. We want to do it to make the world a better place. So when there's a earthquake, you know, literally in Iran, a country that wants to, publicly says that Israel is a Zionist cancer that should be destroyed. But yet a few years ago, when there was an earthquake in Iran, Israel, under the radar, sent people to go there to help rescue people. When there was a tsunami in Asia, who were the first people there? Israel. In Haiti, right? When there were natural disasters, one of the most amazing stories, and I can't do it justice, but just I heard from someone who was a part of the Israeli delegation that went to Haiti when there was the terrible tsunamis and things that were happening there. The amount of children, amount of babies from that time period that were born, that today, now the children growing up that are named Israel, is like a phenomenon in Haiti. It's a phenomenon because the Israelis went and were the first ones there to set up emergency equipment and literally were delivering babies. And the mothers and the people were so thankful that they called their children. It's unbelievable. And so I think the picture that we have to paint, the message we have to get out to people, is the amazing story about Israel. Israel is an amazing story. The fact that the Jewish people have come back after 2,000 years of persecution, of being away from their land, no other nation in the world has done that. The fact that they came back and against all odds survived, literally having to build a country with one hand tied behind their back because constantly being attacked by their neighbors, and not only survive but thrive, that built this modern country that's based on many of the values that in the Western world that we hold so dear, and yet is also making the world a better place. That's an amazing story. That's a story that I think you don't even have to be Jewish to appreciate. A story that you could say, wow, in today's world where we're constantly racing to see who's the bigger victim, and whoever's been persecuted the most, gets the highest mantle. Israel said, we're not about persecution. We're not about being a victim. We're about taking our own destiny in our own hands. And who could claim victimhood more than the Jewish people this last century? And yet they went and they built this place that literally is making the world a better place. So we go much more on about a lot of this. But what I would put forth, and this is really, when we talk about advocacy and what people can do, and there's so much people can do, whether it's writing articles to the newspaper, whether it's being in touch with the politicians, but I think the most important thing is to be able to tell Israel's story. If you've been to Israel, you now have that personal connection. You now have that personal story. So today, getting the information is that's the easy part, right? Through social media, there's so much information out there. Find the information, find your personal connection to that information that tells Israel's story in a positive way, and share it with those people, not those people that, first of all, already love Israel. That's who we normally talk to. We normally talk to ourselves. Not only the people who hate Israel, but all those people in the middle who don't know. And to figure out what are they interested in and show them that Israel can also, is that. And Israel are those things that they're very interested in. Okay, I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions. I could keep going, talk and talk and talk. And there's plenty more to talk about, but I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. Yes.
Who's your target audience? You usually go on campuses. You speaking to you don't start at high school level.
So we do some with high schools. Our main focus is college students, but we do trainings in high schools. We're invited all the time to speak in high schools, whether it's private Jewish schools, but also public schools. There's something called JSU, Jewish Student Union, which is in a lot of public schools, like a Jewish club, and they bring sometimes our staff in to speak to high school students as well.
What's the way to get in contact with you? We have a lot of high school students.
Yeah, I have.
Here that are.
Yeah, so I actually brought some materials from our organization. I have them. I left them in my backpack over there, so I'll get them before we leave. If anybody wants more information, I can give you more information about what we do.
One thing that I would actually focus on more. We were in Israel once, this American Jewish Committee, this AJC, and actually they did kind of like top Jewish leaders throughout the world. They would bring them to Israel, and they did like lectures at the Herzliya Center.
Yeah, the IDC.
And one of the speakers that actually had the biggest impact on all of us was Colonel Gruber.
Yeah.
Who had this amazing presentation.
Ben Gruber, yeah.
Yes, about collateral damage and idea, and he had this PowerPoint presentation. It was so powerful. We said we have to bring this guy to the US.
Yeah,
he actually did do this.
Yeah.
We did bring him here, and he did his presentation in a number of places in the US because his presentation was basically focusing on the way Israeli Defense Force tries to avoid actually avoid hitting innocent civilians, and how we would send, for example, a missile to kill a terrorist, and this missile is like what,
Right,
60,
a mile away, yeah.
$600,000 missile, and the terrorists would grab a child and they would divert the missile to go someplace else just to avoid killing one person. And it was also very powerful. I didn't realize when we're trying to target, for example, a terrorist act that occurred, and we know that the terrorist is hiding because we go through the tunnels in this particular house. Before hitting the house, they would first make a phone call and say, listen,
Right.
in 1 hour, we're going to be bombing your house, get out of the house. And then they would send the, flyers and say, get out, get out of the house, we're going to be bombing you. So we're actually like warning the terrorists that we're going to be bombing them, and you know how.
I think that one of the most powerful ways you can show people, the whole world is, condemning Israel and how immoral they are. So, Hamas, the terrorist group, they hide amongst civilians. Everyone knows this, right? They actually boast about it, that they use civilians, innocent people, as shields, human shields. They do it by hiding amongst, they set up their rocket launchers and things that they're doing in playgrounds and hospitals where there are civilians. And sometimes they literally order civilians to go. Sometimes if they're hiding in a building, they'll tell civilians, go up on the roof of the building because, the Israelis are, going to bomb it, or whatever it might be, that they'll see all the civilians. And there's footage of this, and we know it's all true. When you think about the dynamic, as you mentioned, the Israelis are going to the Palestinian civilians and saying, get out of here, don't put yourself in danger. And what is Hamas saying? No, stay in danger and put yourself here. Now, why does Hamas tell the Palestinian civilians to be a human shield? Why are they telling them that? So A, if Israel decides to do something, it'll make them look bad. I think there's another reason.
They're terrorists, and Israel is a democracy.
No, but why do they do it?
They don't value life. Because they know that the Israelis value life, and then they
Oh.
won't bomb.
So really it's because they know, like you said, when the Israelis saw there was a civilian, so they diverted it. Hamas knows that if they use human shields, if they use Palestinian civilians, then Israel's not going to attack them, that Israel's going to hold back from attacking them. So think about that for a second. Here you have the world saying, you Israelis are using excessive force and you're monsters. And Hamas themselves, the terrorist group, what are they saying? You Israelis are immoral people. You Israelis have such a level of morality that we know that if we put civilians there, you're not going to attack us. It's pretty wild when you think about it. Israel's enemies, look what they're saying about Israel. If Israel was the monster that so many people want to say, right? Think about how many thousands, if not tens of thousands of people would have been killed because they're hiding amongst these civilians. But Israel doesn't do that. It's a very powerful point when you look at it a little bit deeper. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
In that sense, like, how do you think it's so obvious to so many, yet people don't? We know that, and it's even in the news sometimes, but the word's not really out there. Like, people aren't really believing it that Israelis are moral people, not people, but maybe countries.
So I think that's why there's a couple of things. First of all, while I do think this is a very powerful topic, it's a topic that speaks to us. It doesn't actually really speak to those people in the middle that we're trying to get. Because remember, what are we having a discussion about now? If Israel's army is moral. It's a little bit of an oxymoron for a lot of people. A lot of people, they just look at war and so I believe, like I said, we want to shift the debate not to be talking about war and bad and how many people are died and not so many people died and it. We want to be talking about what are the real morals and values of Israel. It could be talking about, look at Israel puts their own soldiers in danger to protect, but really to talk about the other things that people want to hear about, the more personal connection. Like I said, the story of Israel, the amazing thing that this place is there, that it's making the world a better place, that it's based on the values that people can relate to, right? Those are the things I think that speak to people a little bit more and move the dial, and not so much talking about the conflict. And because even though we can win that debate and the facts are on our side, and Israel, the Israeli army is the most moral army in the world, but we're still talking about the battlefield, which we, it's a tough thing to win because people so much already are looking at it as Israel's the big, strong, powerful army, which it is, by the way. against sort of a defenseless civilian population, which is sort of true and not true, right? But it's been very hard to win that battle. People, our brain, there's a reason why the David and Goliath story is so powerful. Our brains are sort of, we work in a way that we cheer for the underdog. We want to see the underdog win. We automatically, feel that there's an injustice when you have a strong and a weak. And it's very hard today for Israel to portray itself as the weak. It's so strong militarily, politically, economically, whatever it might be. So that's why I think we have to shift a little bit and be talking about why people should support Israel. Look at all the amazing things that Israel does, the minority rights, the democratic values, all of those things, making the world a better place, etc. And by the way, those are all Jewish values. These are Jewish values that Israel's embodying, right? That we can also show people and be proud of. And I think that's things that people connect to. You have a quick question? Yeah.
Why do you think the media doesn't report on so much of the terrorism that's happening in Israel?
So why not the? I think there's a few things. I mean, listen, there's definitely the story of what do they say? Man bites dog, dog bites man. You sort of just get used to it. I've heard people who know many of the reporters and editors in Israel who have gone to them and say, the tremendous incitement that is going on in Palestinian schools and Palestinian television. Why aren't you reporting about it? And say, well, tell us something new. Yeah, we know that. Everyone knows that already, right? It's a story that's been, everyone knows. I don't think everyone knows it. So I think there's a little bit of a sense of it's not news, number one. Number two, there's clearly a bias. I mean, you look at, like I said, for the underdog, rooting. Yeah, exactly, Israel, yeah. So there's a rooting for the underdog. I think that is a tremendous power that people just, there's, I mentioned this before and I said I would go into a little bit more later, but you have to remember this generation, people that remember 1967, right? Who remember remember the idea that Israel was vulnerable, that Israel was surrounded by countries that wanted to destroy it. When you look at Israel that way, well, okay, but people don't look at it that way, right? That generation remembers that and says, okay, Israel's not a perfect place, but ultimately the score here is that you have tiny little Israel surrounded by a Middle East that wants to destroy it. Where today, the camera has zoomed in. And now instead of seeing tiny little Israel amongst the bigger Arab world, you see big, strong Israel sort of controlling the helpless Palestinians. That's the narrative that most of the world has adopted, that the media has adopted. And so it's once you adopt that frame, everything now has to fit in the frame. Everything has to fit that narrative. And if it doesn't fit the narrative, it's like, don't confuse me with the facts, So for much of the media, that's how they look at it. Israel is a strong, powerful country, and the Palestinians are the weak, helpless civilians, and you can't look at it any other way.
They own the word refugee, as George Harris put it. We need to own a strong word as refugee to be able to. Yeah,
not just as refugee, occupation, apartheid, a lot of these words.
We own the word occupation. Yeah. There is an article in today's New York Times about, and that's actually, I hate New York Times because it's so anti-Israel, but the article was actually about French Jews thinking of going back to France because they can't find jobs that are actually, they are medics and they are people who are educated cannot find jobs. And they actually compared French immigration to Russian immigration, and they said, look at what educated Russians did to Israel and Israel economy, and look how well they assimilated. Basically, why can't French do that? And it was very interesting because it was about one family with two grown-up daughters who basically high school age, and it says that the daughters feel so comfortable and so they don't want to go back.
Right.
But the mom was a pharmacist, she owned a successful pharmacy and had put in people working for her in France. And now she come in and she works for $6 an hour, and she's moving boxes, and she's at 60 years old. She doesn't want to move boxes, right. And she doesn't want to reapply for the license. And it's kind of like there's a huge French lobbying for them to be able to do the work in their profession without getting a new degree. And I said, why? Well, Russians didn't. Yeah,
it's very interesting. When after the the French supermarket, the terrorist attack at the French supermarket. And Bibi Netanyahu went to Paris, and he said, basically, the Jews, come to Israel. The doors are open. And many people got very upset at him. A lot of the French people got upset. French Jews got upset at him because, what do you mean? We're French. We're Frenchmen. We're not. And yeah, it's very complicated and it's very difficult. It's not a simple situation. I mean, listen, you definitely see the tremendous influx of French there, and unfortunately, it doesn't look like, it looks like the trend is just going to keep, growing and growing as what we see what's happening in the world. But it's
But that's the problem that we can't obviously find the same level of jobs because there is not much. And then there is a separate education department. We're too old to restart them. But at the same time.
So how long is this program already an option, that lectures in the college and the campuses?
The program that we do?
Yeah.
Our program, we take them to Israel. We've been doing it for about 10 years, a little bit more.